The quietest moments of my old life were the ones I cherished the most. The hushed reverence of our home after the kids were asleep, the soft rustle of my wife turning a page in a book beside me on the couch, the silent, satisfying upward creep of our investment portfolio. It was a quiet born of security, of a life meticulously planned and flawlessly executed. I was a civil engineer. I built bridges, literally. My entire professional life was dedicated to the principles of structure, stress points, and load-bearing capacity. I understood better than most how to build something that would last. I applied the same principles to my family's life. Our finances were a fortress of my own design, a solid foundation of a well-paying job supported by the strong pillars of a diversified portfolio of stocks and a robust savings account. My wife, my beautiful, sensible wife, was the heart of that fortress. She trusted my calculations implicitly. I was the man who understood risk management, who could see the stress fractures in a plan before they became catastrophic. We weren't just comfortable, we were safe. And in that safety, we were happy. We had 2 children, a son and a daughter, who were growing up in a world without the financial anxiety that had been a quiet, constant hum in my own childhood. I had built a bridge for my family, a bridge over the turbulent waters of uncertainty, and I was proud of my work. But a man who spends his life looking for stress fractures can sometimes become obsessed with the idea of a perfect, unbreakable structure. My obsession, my fatal flaw, was my belief that I could build a shortcut across the river, a Golden Gate bridge of wealth that would get us to the land of forever safe, not in 20 years, but overnight. The vehicle for this fantasy was sports betting. It didn't start as an addiction. It started as a game, an intellectual exercise. As an engineer, I was a man of data and patterns. I became convinced that sports betting wasn't just gambling. It was a market like any other, filled with inefficiencies that a smart, analytical mind could exploit. I wasn't a degenerate throwing money at his favorite team. I was a quantitative analyst, a sharp, applying my skills to a new and exciting asset class. It began with $100 in an online account, a hobby. I built spreadsheets, I created algorithms, I spent hours analyzing statistics, weather patterns, and injury reports, and for a while my thesis seemed to be correct. I was winning, small amounts but consistently. The feeling was intoxicating, a potent cocktail of intellectual superiority and financial gain. It was a secret thrill, a validation that I was smarter than the millions of other people playing the same game. My small, secret hobby began to grow. The $100 account became a $1,000 account. The small, intellectual thrill began to morph into a low-grade, constant hum of excitement. The quiet satisfaction of my real life, the slow, steady progress of my real investments started to feel dull, pedestrian. Why build a bridge one steel beam at a time when you could fly? I started to see my steady, reliable salary not as the foundation of our security, but as a source of investment capital for my system. I was living a double life. By day, I was the sensible, risk-averse engineer, the loving husband and father. By night, after the house was quiet, I would descend into the glowing, digital world of betting slips and live odds, a secret high roller in a game no one knew I was playing. The first lie to my wife felt like a small transgression, a minor sin. She asked about a charge on our credit card, and I told her it was for a new piece of software for work. She believed me without question. Why wouldn't she? I was the man who built bridges, not the man who was secretly digging a tunnel under the foundations of our own home. That first lie was the first stress fracture in the perfect structure of my life, and I was the one who had put it there. The winds continued, and my confidence swelled into a dangerous, blinding arrogance. I had cracked the code. I had a system that couldn't lose. The quiet, boring money in our savings and investment accounts started to seem lazy, inefficient. It was just sitting there, earning a pathetic few percent a year. My system was yielding 10 times that. The thought, at first a whisper, then a roar, began to consume me. I could take that lazy money and put it to work. I could take our entire fortress, every brick and every pillar, and I could use it to build a skyscraper, a testament to my own genius that would touch the clouds. I was no longer just a man with a hobby. I was a man with a vision so bright and so beautiful that I couldn't see it was the light of an oncoming train. The transition from a secret hobby to a full-blown obsession is not a conscious choice. It's a slow, insidious erosion of your own best judgment, a series of small, seemingly rational decisions that lead you, one step at a time, to the edge of a cliff. My cliff was paved with the delusion that I was an investor, not a gambler. The first major erosion of my own principles was the decision to tap into our long-term investments. I created an elaborate story for my wife, a story about a unique, time-sensitive opportunity to invest in a commercial real estate syndicate through a colleague at my firm. It was a brilliant lie, filled with the kind of sensible, risk-averse language she trusted. I talked about diversification, about long-term growth, about creating another stream of passive income. She was hesitant, but my confidence was a powerful force. I was the expert, the man who had built our financial world. She trusted my calculations. The pain of liquidating those stocks, the ones we had so patiently accumulated, was sharp and real. It felt like I was selling off pieces of our shared history, our shared future. But the addict in my brain, the voice of my obsession, quickly soothed the pain with the promise of a glorious return. This wasn't a loss. It was a reallocation of assets into a higher-yield instrument. I was a fund manager making a bold but calculated play. With a much larger bankroll, the stakes became higher, the wins more exhilarating, and the losses more catastrophic. And the losses started to come. My unbeatable system was, of course, a fiction. It was just a lucky streak, and the cold, hard mathematics of probability eventually came to collect their due. A single, unexpected upset in a game could wipe out a week's worth of wins. A string of bad luck could decimate my account. And with every loss, the desperation grew. I was no longer playing with the casino's money. I was playing with our life. The chase began. It's the most dangerous phase of a gambler's descent. You're no longer playing for the thrill of the win. You're playing with the grim, desperate need to get back to even. The rational, analytical engineer was gone, replaced by a frantic, emotional addict, throwing good money after bad, convinced that the next bet would be the one that would make him whole. My life outside of the betting world began to crumble. At my engineering firm, my work became sloppy, my attention to detail once my trademark was gone. I was physically present in meetings, but my mind was 1,000 miles away, analyzing a point spread, agonizing over a bad beat from the night before. I was a ghost in my own career, and my superiors started to notice. The fortress of my professional life, which I had thought was unbreachable, was starting to show cracks. At home, I was a phantom. The easy, loving connection with my wife was replaced by a tense, fragile silence, punctuated by my own irritability and distraction. I was a coiled spring of anxiety, and my family felt the tremors. My wife would try to talk to me, to breach the wall I had built around myself, but I would deflect with anger or retreat into the glowing screen of my phone. She knew something was wrong, terribly wrong, but she couldn't have imagined the truth. She thought I was stressed about work, about the big real estate deal I had lied about. The truth was 1,000 times worse, a betrayal so profound it would have been incomprehensible to her. The debt started to pile up. When the investment money was gone, I turned to credit cards, then to high-interest personal loans. I was a man in a hole, and instead of trying to climb out, I was digging deeper, faster, with a desperate, suicidal energy. I was living a life of pure, frantic fiction. Every day was a performance, an elaborate act of pretending to be the same reliable, successful man I had always been, while in reality I was a desperate, hollowed-out addict, one step away from complete and total ruin. I needed a miracle. I needed one big, final bet that would solve everything. It was the addict's final, desperate prayer, the belief that you can fix a decade of bad decisions with one lucky turn of a card. I found my miracle, my sure thing. It was a multi-game parlay, a high-risk, high-reward bet that linked the outcomes of several different games. If any one of them lost, the whole bet was a bust. But if they all won, the payout would be astronomical. It would be enough. Enough to pay back the loans, to replenish the savings, to erase the lies, to become the hero of my own story again. I took the last of the borrowed money, a sum that represented the final vestiges of our financial life, and I placed the bet. It was an act of pure, unadulterated madness, a final, desperate leap into the abyss, with a blind faith that I would somehow grow wings on the way down. The day of the games was a slow-motion exercise in torture. I called in sick to work, the lie so practiced now it slipped out without a thought. I locked myself in my home office, the same room where I had once meticulously planned our family's secure future, and I turned on the televisions. I had multiple screens going, a command center for my own personal apocalypse. The first few games of the parlay were a nerve-shredding ordeal. Each one was close, coming down to the final seconds, but one by one they hit. My analysis, my system, was working. A dangerous, intoxicating hope began to bubble up in my chest. I was right. I had been right all along. The universe was finally acknowledging my genius. My wife came home with the kids in the middle of the afternoon. She saw me in the office, my face a mask of manic, sweaty concentration, and she looked at me with a new expression, an expression of pure, unadulterated fear. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice quiet. "This is it," I said, my eyes not leaving the screens. "This is the big one. This is for us." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the madness in my eyes. She slowly backed out of the room, closing the door softly, as if she were dealing with a wild, unpredictable animal. It all came down to the final game, a late-night basketball game on the West Coast. Everything was riding on this. My life, my family, our home, our future. All of it had been distilled into the final 2 minutes of a game being played by a group of young men 3,000 miles away who had no idea I even existed. My team was up by 1 point. The other team had the ball. The final seconds ticked off the clock. A desperate last-second shot. The ball arced through the air, a perfect, beautiful parabola of hope for them, a trajectory of absolute doom for me. It swished through the net as the buzzer sounded. The roar of the crowd on the television was the sound of my life ending. For a long time, I just sat there in the silent, dark office. The screens had gone to commercial, their cheerful, mindless jingles a bizarre and cruel counterpoint to the utter devastation in my soul. I looked at my betting account online. The beautiful, six-figure potential payout was gone, replaced by the familiar, mocking zero. It was over. I had lost. The final, desperate prayer had not been answered. I walked out of the office and into the living room. My wife was there waiting. She had been waiting all night. She didn't have to ask. She saw it on my face, the look of a man who had been completely and irrevocably broken. I told her everything, the whole ugly, pathetic story. The lies, the debt, the scale of the loss. I watched as her fear turned to a cold, hard, and utterly final understanding. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked at me with the eyes of a stranger, a look of such profound, bottomless disappointment that it was 1,000 times more painful than any rage. The consequences arrived with the speed and brutality of a flash flood. The loans I had taken out were called in. The second mortgage on our house meant foreclosure was not a possibility, but a certainty. My job, which I had already abandoned in spirit, soon abandoned me in reality. I was fired for my long history of poor performance and absenteeism. In the span of a single week, I had lost our entire net worth, our home, and our only source of income. My wife, in an act of pure, necessary self-preservation, did the only thing she could. She packed. She was taking the children to her parents' house. It was not an act of vengeance, it was an act of rescue. She was a mother, and her first duty was to get her children out of a war zone. I was the war zone. I stood on the driveway of the house we had built together, the house that was no longer ours, and I watched her drive away. My son looked at me through the back window, his small face a question I could never answer. I was no longer a husband, a father, a provider, an engineer. I was a cautionary tale, a ghost. I was a man who had been given everything and had, through his own arrogance and obsession, turned it all to dust. The first few months after the world ended were lived in a thick, disorienting fog. I was a ghost haunting the ruins of my own life. I moved out of our family home and into a succession of cheap, transient motel rooms, each one a new circle of a very personal hell. The shame was a physical thing, a heavy, suffocating cloak I couldn't take off. My ego, the part of me that had believed I was smarter than the odds, had been pulverized. I was a brilliant engineer who had designed his own cage and then thrown away the key. The days were a blur of emptiness. I was adrift in a sea of unstructured time, with nothing to do but marinate in the toxic stew of my own regret. The only thing that pierced through the fog was the raw, brutal reality of survival. I had no money, no job, and a mountain of debt that was a constant, screaming presence. The phone calls from creditors were a daily ritual of humiliation. I had to work. The thought was terrifying. My old career was a distant, inaccessible memory. My confidence was a shattered wreck. I started at the absolute bottom. I took a job as a night cleaner in a downtown office building. The work was solitary, mindless, and physically demanding. It was a world away from my old life of blueprints and client meetings. I was a man who had once designed skyscrapers, and now I was scrubbing their toilets. The humility of it was a powerful and necessary medicine. For 8 hours a night, I was not the man who had lost everything. I was just a man with a mop, with a simple, tangible task to perform. The physical exhaustion was a blessing. It quieted the merciless monologue in my head, and the small, cash paycheck at the end of the week was a victory more profound than any winning bet I had ever collected. It was the first honest money I had earned in a long, long time. It was in the sterile, silent hallways of that office building in the dead of night that I was finally forced to confront the truth. My problem wasn't a losing streak. It was a sickness. My obsession with betting wasn't about the money. It was about the thrill, the escape, the feeling of power in a life that had felt too predictable, too safe. I had been trying to build a shortcut to happiness, and I had ended up lost in a dark, terrifying forest. My first step out of that forest was into the basement of a community center. I walked into a gambler's anonymous meeting, a broken, trembling man. I sat in a circle of strangers and listened to their stories, and in their pain I heard the echo of my own. I was not unique. I was not a special case. I was just another addict who had been humbled by a force far more powerful than himself. Saying my name, admitting my powerlessness, was the hardest and most liberating act of my life. The journey of recovery is not a story of a single heroic victory. It's a story of 1,000 small, daily choices. It's the choice to go to a meeting instead of a casino. It's the choice to tell the truth instead of a lie. It's the choice to accept the wreckage of your past and to focus on the single, difficult task of building a better day today. I started to rebuild my life, not from the top down with a grand blueprint, but from the ground up with the small, sturdy bricks of honesty and hard work. I moved from the motel to a small, rented room. I started to chip away at my mountain of debt, one small, painful payment at a time. It was a way of taking responsibility, a way of honoring the man I was trying to become. I re-established contact with my children, first through my ex-wife, then through cautious, stilted phone calls. I didn't talk about the past. I didn't make promises about the future. I just asked about them. I learned about their new lives. I became a student of my own children, and in doing so, I started to learn how to be a father again. My life today is a simple, quiet thing. I still clean offices at night. The work is hard, but it's honest. I live in a small room. I take the bus. I will be paying for my mistakes for the rest of my life. I am, by every measure of the world I once valued, a failure. But I am not a man in despair. I have found a strange, unexpected peace in the simplicity of my new life. I am no longer chasing a thrill. I am no longer trying to build a shortcut. I'm just walking one slow, deliberate step at a time on the long, hard road of an honest life. I lost everything I thought was important. But in the desolate quiet of the aftermath, I was forced to find the things that truly are: a clear conscience, the love of my children, and the quiet, hard-won dignity of a man who has faced his own darkness and has chosen to walk toward the light. I'd love to hear your reaction. Drop a comment with your thoughts and where you're watching from. Like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned for more stories.